Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining this session. I am pleased to introduce Mrs. Mandy Heine. Mandy is the Teaching and Learning Specialist at IIE Varsity College and IIE Vega Durban, and a PhD student in the Department of Humanities at University of Victoria. She has worked in private higher education for 15 years, lecturing at a variety, a variety of modules in the humanities and education disciplines and supporting lecturers in developing their teaching practice. Welcome, Mandy. You have 15 minutes for your presentation, and please allow for 5 minutes Q&A right at the end. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. And okay, great. So I'm on my first slide there. So I wanted to just say that I'm presenting alone today, but this research project is a joint effort with my colleague Liesel. Liesel and I work for the IE Varsity College in the teaching and learning space, and she is in the online center. Okay, so just to provide a brief context. Our institution was established in 1991, and we have several campuses throughout South Africa. In 2017, we expanded to offer online qualifications in our online campus, and we have a structured peer review process which was introduced in 2006. I want to just pause for a moment here, as I think it's important to note that lecturers in private higher education facilitate content that is developed centrally. And so there's a strong focus on teaching practice and delivery and facilitation of learning. To date, our peer review process has not been formally adapted for our online space. And so this project began as a conversation around the suitability of our peer review process for the online context. So some adaptations have been made intuitively, but Liesel and I really wanted to use research to take this practical problem to our online lecturers and explore how peer review can be more intentionally adapted to suit the online learning space and also be more meaningful for our lecturers. So before I get into the detail of the study, I want to just briefly talk about what peer review of teaching actually means and why it's used. A typical peer review process looks something like this. A lecturer is paired up with someone in the institution, a peer, who is considered an expert. Now, this expertise may lie in the discipline itself or in the teaching and learning space. And it's a structured process where the reviewer observes the lecturer and then provides what is deemed as constructive and actionable feedback on their teaching methods so that they are able to improve. In our institution, there are 3 points of contact: the pre-discussion, the observation itself, and the feedback session. So why do we have peer reviews? There are several institutional goals for peer review. Some are formative, some are summative, but fundamentally, the practice is driven by the acknowledgement that student learning is closely linked to the quality of teaching. And so the aim is to create a cycle of feedback and reflection that helps lecturers grow in meaningful ways. So our question was, if student learning is at the heart of this practice, let's consider how students learn in an online space. Unlike face-to-face teaching, online learning isn't confined to a physical lecture space or a lecture that can be observed in a moment in time. So the kind of teaching that's observable changes. And we really need to rethink what good teaching looks like here. I also think it's important to acknowledge that a lecturer could be a rock star in a face-to-face environment, or have the most incredible, well-designed content and curriculum. But if that lecturer is unsuccessful in facilitating the learning in an online space, students may well be compromised. So turning to the literature, we see that peer review is a ubiquitous practice in higher education, and there have been several models discussed over the years, with the most preferred approach for academics being a collaborative one that was first conceptualized by Gosling in 2002. And the literature reveals that peer review is in fact quite a paradoxical practice. It does have perceived benefits, mostly from an institutional perspective, but it also comes with significant challenges, some of which relate to restrictiveness, compliance, lack of time, and how intimidating the process can feel. The literature also tells us that the online context is vastly different in terms of peer review, and there have been calls for further research consistently over the years to explore in this space. To date, there is still limited research on this particular topic. So the insights that we extrapolated from what has already been written about were really useful in guiding our study. And we see that it is really critical that a practice that is effective in a face-to-face environment should not simply be transferred into the online space in the hopes that it will achieve a similar outcome. The context is unique in multiple ways. Online facilitation takes place within a digital ecosystem, typically within a learning management system, and it's very often predominantly asynchronous. Therefore, aspects such as a strong lecturer presence, all types of interaction and communication with students, as well as teaching resources, are really significant. And this brings me to our study, which is framed by social constructivism. So social constructivist stance emphasizes that learning is socially situated and individuals learn best through interaction and collaboration. Peer review is a professional learning practice, and so this theoretical framing makes perfect sense for such a process. But it's also an appropriate lens to frame our research approach, to prioritize the voices of those experiencing the process in its current format, and to co-construct a solution with them. And so we conducted semi-structured interviews with 6 of our online lecturers to understand how peer review can become more meaningful for them. We talked through how the current system of peer review is being implemented in the online space. We discussed the intuitive adaptations that are being made. We also looked at what is valuable to them and should remain, what should be ditched, and what else should be considered to make it more meaningful. And 4 key themes emerged. So firstly, the lecturers felt that the process had to be tailored to online. This was really important because it's got such specific demands. And it also needed to be personal to their learning needs. They also insisted that conversation and dialogue was absolutely critical and extremely valuable, and this needed to start at the beginning of the semester and continue throughout the semester, as opposed to formalized meetings before and after a teaching event. They also highlighted the importance of building lecturer presence through both synchronous and asynchronous engagement with students, as well as teaching resources, and felt that all of this should be part of what is observable for the peer review. So taking the insights we extrapolated from the literature and the themes and suggestions that came out of the interviews, we were able to conceptualize a model for an expanded process that we propose is more suitable for an online teaching environment and which our online lecturers helped us to construct. And I'm going to take you through the 6 phases of this model. So the first key principle is that peer review in online settings needs to involve someone experienced in online teaching. This is not about subject matter expertise. It is about knowing the online space, understanding the specific skills needed to facilitate learning in this environment. And this partnership needs to be established right at the beginning of the semester to allow the time that's needed to fully support this facilitation. The basis of the relationship should always be conversational, and it's within this dialogue and partnership that tailored support can be offered. We found that making the peer review personal is incredibly important to the lecturers, as they want the process to be meaningful for their own learning. And what is observable in this environment must expand to include the full scope of facilitation. And closely linked to what is observable is the idea that in the online space, a peer review shouldn't ever be a one-time observation. It should be a continuous process where support happens over time and across multiple teaching practices because of this unique nature of student learning in this environment. The process also needs to connect the lecturer with a community of practice. So peer review isn't just about the one-on-one interaction with the reviewer. It's about interacting and building connections with others in the same field. And it creates opportunities for sharing resources and tapping into a collective wisdom to enhance teaching practices. This is also where the opportunity to see someone else's online teaching practices is so valuable. And so whilst we acknowledge that some form of written feedback is important from a compliance viewpoint, the lecturers felt that it is the dialogue that really drives the change. And all of our participants emphasized how valuable it was to talk through their teaching practices and receive real-time feedback, especially on their curated teaching resources. This is also an opportunity for the lecturer and reviewer to discuss new tools, strategies, or improving materials that could be useful in the lecturer's practice. And the concluding phase is all about reflection. After the review process, the lecturer takes time to reflect on their journey during the semester and to reflect on the feedback they've received, what they've learned, how they've been supported, and where they still want to go. This reflection shifts the ownership of the learning to the lecturer and can also provide useful insights to the academic who has been the reviewer. And so this is our proposed collaborative model for meaningful peer review of teaching in fully online learning environments. So what comes next? The plan is to roll this out over the course of next year, over 2 semesters. During this period, we'll be focusing on how the process works in the real world, in practice, and gathering insights from both reviewers and lecturers. After the first year, we'll evaluate how well it's working, and we'll conduct further research. And the goal really is to make sure that this model remains flexible and adaptable. And we are very prepared to tweak it based on the feedback that we receive from those involved. We would also welcome any suggestions and insights from any academics in this forum who may be working with a system for professional learning of online lecturers to connect and share with us. Thank you.
Thank you
2
so
minutes
much,
early.
Mandy. Yes, we will take some few questions or comments from our attendees. If you have any questions, please post in the chat, or you can raise your hand to ask Mandy a question. While we wait for those questions, I just wanted to note, Mandy, and just to say thank you for just sharing your peer review model. I think it's quite key in terms of also identifying that what it happens on the online space in terms of the teaching and the learning happening there. We cannot use the same instruments or models that we do with face-to-face to actually evaluate and reflect, because that means we are reflecting perhaps a decontextualized lens if we take that approach. I think I just wanted to ask what specific challenges that the lecturers face prior to this, prior to integrating this model, or perhaps proposing this model?
So how our lecturers battled was that our peer review process is a three-phased approach. So there's a meeting to discuss a teaching and learning approach, then there's an observation, and then there's feedback afterwards. And so what has been happening in the online space, with a few adaptations here and there, is that the reviewer pops into one of the live synchronous lectures, which is really just one slice of such a massive picture and such a broad way of facilitating learning. And so there have been other, as I said before, intuitive adaptations where reviewers have jumped into resources and had a look at recordings, but none of it is formalized or intentional. So it often depends on the lecturer and the context. And so what our research aims to do is to say, let's intentionally adapt this and expand this for the context within which it's taking place. Because at the moment we're using something that was originally designed for face-to-face and which is running in the face-to-face environment with some success.
Thanks for that. I think also Yolandi has mentioned she loves the inclusion of reflection. And yes, perhaps that's also key in terms of closing that feedback loop that we need to be mindful of. Are there any other comments or questions?
Also, just on that feedback and reflection, I think if I may just explain that obviously peer review as a practice or professional learning is something that we need to do in higher education. It's part of our quality assurance. So we are expected to evidence that our lecturers are being supported. But with our existing peer review process, the reviewer is responsible for producing that paperwork. And what we're saying here is let's shift it so that the ownership of that reflection and then the paperwork, which serves as evidence that this process has happened, goes to the lecturer, who is ultimately the one who's benefiting from it and whose experience is the most important one, of the two. Shift it to them.
Yes. I also echo what Tammy has said in the chat there. Great potential to add real value to the peer review process in an online space. Looking forward to seeing it evolve. And as Dr. Tracy there as well has mentioned, that's also empowering for the lecturer. Because I think most often we see peer reviews as perhaps part of the policing comes with the package, I suppose, or the incentive of promotions, I suppose. But thank you for sharing your insightful model, Mandy. Colleagues, I am going to close if there are no other questions. And yes, I would just like to notify you that could you please join our lunch hour session where Prof. Nicolene Kutsia will speak about self-care. I suppose that will be part of actually what we were speaking about there in terms of reflection. Perhaps even with online, we need to have that time where we self-reflect and I suppose just be mindful of our own self-care there. So please join that. Also remember to attend our closing session where great prizes are up for grabs, and good luck to everyone who actually entered the draw, and I will see you in the next session. Thank you, Mandy.